The grand ballroom glittered beneath golden chandeliers, their crystals scattering light across marble floors polished to perfection. Long tables stretched elegantly, draped in velvet cloth and lined with silver cutlery. It was no ordinary evening. This was a private dinner hosted by one of the wealthiest and most respected sheikhs in the Middle East. Manny Pacquiao, dressed modestly in a tailored suit, walked in with his wife and daughter at his side. Unlike the businessmen and dignitaries who filled the room, Manny carried no air of arrogance. He greeted everyone with his familiar warmth. A champion, yet humble as ever. Guests whispered as he passed, some in awe of the legend, others curious about why a global boxing icon was here among political leaders and tycoons. For Manny, it wasn't about power or wealth. Tonight was about building friendship and showing respect to the host. The sheikh entered last, his presence commanding immediate silence. Tall and dressed in flowing white robes, he carried himself with the ease of someone used to authority. His eyes swept across the guests, assessing them quietly, as though measuring not just their titles but their character. Dinner began smoothly. Dishes of fragrant lamb, saffron rice, and golden dates were served. Laughter rose in patches across the room, though beneath the polite conversation everyone felt the sheikh's watchful gaze. He was known for testing those around him, not with fists or money but with wisdom. Then, as the plates were cleared, the sheikh leaned forward. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the chatter. Without warning, he spoke in Arabic. The words rolled fluently from his tongue, a riddle steeped in tradition. His eyes scanned the room, waiting. A heavy silence fell. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Guests glanced nervously at one another, hoping anyone understood. But not a single dignitary moved. Manny stayed respectful, listening closely. He knew a test when he saw one. His daughter, sitting quietly beside him, tilted her head slightly, her eyes bright with recognition. The sheikh repeated his question, slower this time, his gaze sharper. Who in this room would dare respond to the sheikh's unexpected challenge? The sheikh's words hung in the air like a riddle carved from stone. His Arabic flowed with elegance, but to most of the guests in the room it may as well have been an ancient code. Eyes darted from one table to another, but nobody moved. The silence stretched. Even the servers froze, holding silver trays against their chests as they waited for anyone, to respond. One guest, a wealthy businessman, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Excellency, perhaps you could repeat the question in English?" he suggested. The sheikh's eyes narrowed. His reply was calm but sharp. "No. A man's wisdom is measured not only by what he knows, but by his willingness to learn what others know." The businessman sank back into his seat. Embarrassed, Manny Pacquiao sat quietly, his hands folded in front of him. He didn't fidget. He didn't pretend to understand. He simply listened. He knew better than to speak without certainty. The sheikh repeated the riddle again, this time slower, each syllable deliberate. "Man ta'allama lugatan qawman, amin sharahum." The room remained still. Those who recognized pieces of the Arabic phrase were too nervous to answer. Those who didn't understand a word looked even more lost. A dignitary whispered to another, "What does it mean?" The reply came back just as uncertain. "Something about language, but I don't know." The sheikh leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping the tables. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even impatient. He was testing, measuring, watching how these so-called leaders reacted when faced with something outside their control. Some guests chuckled nervously, trying to mask their discomfort. Others avoided his eyes entirely, as though not being seen would save them from embarrassment. But Manny's daughter sat straighter in her chair. Her young eyes studied the sheikh, her lips moving silently as she repeated the phrase in her mind. The sheikh noticed her, tilting his head slightly. He could see curiosity flickering in her expression, the kind of spark most adults in the room had already lost. Still, she remained silent, for now. The sheikh then addressed the entire room in English, his tone serious. "In this gathering are men of power, wealth, and influence. But tell me, how can a man lead the world if he cannot understand the world's voices?" The weight of his question pressed on every heart. Backs stiffened, throats tightened. Nobody dared to answer, afraid of humiliation. The silence was now uncomfortable, even suffocating. Every second felt heavier than the last. Phones, though hidden under tables, were discreetly recording. Guests knew this was a moment that would spread beyond these walls. The Sheikh was famous for his wisdom, and this test was now part of history in the making. Manny's daughter looked at her father. Manny met her eyes, calm, reassuring, but curious. He gave a small nod as if to say, "If you know, do not fear." Her heart pounded. She was the youngest person in the room, the smallest among giants, and yet she was the only one who seemed to understand. The Sheikh repeated his phrase one last time, his voice deeper, almost challenging. Man ta'alama lugatan qawman, amin sharrahum. And the question hovered in the air, unanswered, daring someone to step forward. If you were in this room, would you risk speaking up, or stay silent and safe? Comment below what you would do. The silence in the ballroom had grown unbearable. The Sheikh's riddle still lingered in the air, unanswered. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others sipped nervously from their glasses, pretending to look thoughtful, but deep inside they all felt the same truth. They were lost. Manny remained calm, his posture steady. He wasn't embarrassed to admit he didn't know Arabic. Humility was second nature to him. Yet he could sense something stirring beside him, his daughter. She sat quietly, her small hands resting on her lap, her gaze fixed on the Sheikh. The words he had spoken echoed in her mind. She remembered hearing the phrase before during her lessons, when she studied Arabic with a tutor back home. The meaning came back to her slowly, like a lantern lighting a dark path. Her heart raced. She glanced at her father. Manny looked back at her with gentle eyes, giving no command but offering silent strength. His look seemed to say, "Trust yourself. Do what feels right." The Sheikh, noticing her intent gaze, raised an eyebrow. "Child," he said, his deep voice echoing across the hall. "Do you know the meaning of what I asked?" All eyes turned toward her. The laughter, the whispers, the murmurs, and they all stopped. Even the clinking of cutlery from the servers halted. The weight of 100 gazes pressed down on her small frame. For a moment, she hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears. A part of her wanted to shrink into her chair, to let the silence protect her from risk. But then she remembered her father's stories. How he had faced giants in the ring without fear. How he had always chosen courage, not because it was easy, but because it was right. She took a deep breath. And then, in perfect Arabic, she spoke. Man ta'allama lughatan qawman amin sharahum. The words rolled from her tongue with confidence. Gasps rippled across the room. Dozens of powerful men and women froze, stunned that the smallest voice in the hall had just repeated the Sheikh's phrase flawlessly. The Sheikh leaned forward, his eyes suddenly alive with interest. "And do you know what it means?" he asked. She nodded, her voice steady now. "Yes, Your Excellency. It means whoever learns the language of a people is safe from their harm." The ballroom erupted in shock. Some clapped instinctively, others simply stared in disbelief. The very words that had silenced billionaires, ministers, and dignitaries were answered by a young girl, and answered with grace. Manny's eyes widened, pride swelling in his chest. He hadn't known just how deeply she had studied, how confidently she could step into such a moment. He smiled softly, his hand brushing her shoulder in silent acknowledgement. "I am proud of you." The Sheikh sat back, stroking his beard thoughtfully. A slow smile spread across his face, not the smile of amusement, but of deep respect. He nodded once firmly. "You are correct," he said. "Wisdom can come from the smallest among us. Knowledge has no age, no rank, no title, and courage," he added, looking directly at her, "is the crown of the young." The guests erupted again, some cheering, others whispering furiously. "Unbelievable. Even the Sheikh is impressed." How did she know that? For a brief moment, the grand hall belonged not to the billionaires, not to the politicians, not even to the Sheikh, but to Manny's daughter. She had spoken truth when others stayed silent. The ballroom still buzzed from the shock of Manny's daughter answering the Sheikh's riddle. The wealthy and powerful, who moments ago sat with their chests puffed out, now looked small in comparison to the young girl who had just outshone them. But the Sheikh was not done. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, studying her with sharp, curious eyes. There was no mockery in his gaze, only intrigue. He had spent years surrounded by men who bowed to him, Yet here was a child who stood tall, her voice steady, her spirit unshaken. The sheikh chuckled softly, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Very good," he said. "You understood not only my words but their meaning. But let me ask you this." The room grew still again. Forks paused, breaths held, eyes locked on the sheikh as he prepared his next test. This time he spoke faster, in flowing Arabic that even native speakers would find challenging. His words painted a picture poetic yet heavy. Al-ilmu bila amalin kash-shajari bila thamarin. The phrase slipped across the room like a puzzle dropped in front of the crowd. Many heard the sound, but few caught the meaning. Guests turned to one another again, whispering hopelessly. "What did he say? Something about trees? No, maybe it's about wisdom. I'm not sure." The sheikh finished his phrase and leaned back, waiting. His eyes went straight to Manny's daughter. He wanted to see if her earlier answer had been a lucky guess or if true understanding lived within her. The little girl inhaled deeply. The words were harder this time, but she remembered. Her tutor had once explained this very saying to her, an old Arabic proverb. She repeated it silently in her mind, making sure she hadn't forgotten. Manny watched her closely. He could see her lips moving without sound, her brows furrowed in concentration. He didn't interfere. This was her moment, and he trusted her to choose it. Finally, she lifted her head and spoke, not with hesitation, but with quiet confidence. "Al-ilmu bila amalin kash-shajari bila thamarin," she repeated, her accent soft but clear. Then she continued in English so that everyone could understand. "It means knowledge without action is like a tree without fruit." The room froze once again, and then, as though a wave had rolled through the hall, murmurs erupted. She translated again. "That's exactly right. Incredible. Twice in a row?" The sheikh's eyes widened with unmistakable admiration. His lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. He clapped his hands together once, a sharp sound that echoed across the marble hall. "Well said," he declared. "Knowledge without action is useless. And yet here you are, young as you are, putting your knowledge into action with courage and humility. This," he gestured toward her, "is wisdom many grown men still lack." Manny's daughter lowered her gaze respectfully, but her face glowed with quiet pride. She hadn't done it to impress anyone. She had simply answered because she knew it was right. Manny himself could hardly hide his pride. His daughter, standing among kings and billionaires, had become the center of respect. He leaned toward her and whispered, "You have more courage than most fighters I've ever met." The guests, still buzzing, looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Pacquiao's daughter speaks Arabic. She's brilliant. Imagine her future." Even the sheikh is impressed. And then, for the first time that evening, the sheikh rose from his seat. The entire hall followed his lead, standing out of respect. His voice carried warmth now, not just authority. "You have shown us that greatness does not depend on age, or wealth, or power," he said, his eyes sweeping the room. "Sometimes it is the pure heart of a child that carries the brightest light." The applause was thunderous. Some clapped politely, others enthusiastically, but all of them knew they had just witnessed something rare. The sheikh had tested them all. And it was Manny's daughter who passed. The applause eventually faded, but the energy in the hall did not. Guests who had been stiff with pride now found themselves humbled, their eyes drifting again and again toward the young girl who had spoken with such fluency and wisdom. The sheikh, still standing, allowed the murmurs to settle before raising his hand. Instantly, silence returned. His gaze, sharp but softened by respect, focused on Manny's daughter. "You have surprised me," he said in Arabic, then switched to English so all could understand. "It is rare that anyone in this room answers with truth and confidence. Rarer still that it comes from one so young. But tell me." He paused, letting the moment stretch. "Do you know why I asked these questions?" The crowd leaned in, curious. The sheikh was known for his wisdom, but rarely did he reveal the deeper purpose behind his tests. Manny's daughter hesitated for only a second before responding. "Because knowledge is not just for keeping," she said softly. "It is for sharing. To see who is willing to listen, to learn, and to speak with courage." A ripple went through the room. Heads turned. Even the most skeptical guest could not deny the clarity in her answer. The sheikh's eyes lit with approval. But then he decided to push further. He wanted to see if her wisdom was a momentary spark, or a steady flame. He asked again, this time weaving a complex question in Arabic, mixing poetry and philosophy. إذا لم تكن حلاما فقد أسيت حكمة وإذا لم تكن عدلا فقد ظلمت نفسك. The words rolled across the hall like a riddle from centuries past. Even some Arabic speakers furrowed their brows, unsure of the exact phrasing. Guests exchanged glances. Nobody dared attempt an answer. All eyes turned once more to Manny's daughter. Her small hands tightened slightly on her lap, but her face showed no fear. She repeated the phrase in her mind, remembering how her tutor once explained these lines, a proverb about patience and justice. She looked up at the sheikh, her voice steady. If you are not patient, you betray wisdom, and if you are not just, you betray yourself. The hall erupted. This time there was no hesitation in the applause. It was immediate, thunderous, and filled with genuine awe. Men and women who had once looked down their noses were now clapping with respect, some even standing to honor her words. Manny sat quietly, his expression calm, but his eyes glowing with pride. For once, the world wasn't looking at him, the champion. They were looking at his daughter, who carried herself like a natural leader. The sheikh raised his hand again, but this time not for silence. Instead, he clapped slowly, deliberately, the sound echoing in the grand hall. When the sheikh himself applauded, the entire room followed suit until the applause felt like an earthquake shaking the chandeliers. He then turned to Manny, his voice carrying both warmth and gravity. Senator Pacquiao, you have fought great battles in the ring, but I see now that your greatest victory may be here, in the wisdom and courage of your child. Manny bowed his head humbly. All I can say, Your Excellency, is that she teaches me as much as I teach her. The sheikh smiled, a deep, genuine smile rarely seen by anyone outside his inner circle. Then tonight we have all learned something. That dignity is not inherited by title or wealth, but by character. The guests were left speechless. Some looked ashamed of their earlier arrogance. Others whispered about the future, wondering what kind of leader Manny's daughter might one day become. At that moment, the power in the room had shifted. Not to the richest man, not to the most decorated dignitary, but to the wisdom of a child who dared to speak when others remained silent. The ballroom had transformed. Only an hour ago, the guests were seated in smug silence, confident in their wealth and titles. Now they shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, humbled not by another billionaire, not by the sheikh himself, but by a child. The sheikh remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes, which once scanned the hall with stern judgment, now rested warmly on Manny's daughter. He raised his voice so all could hear. In this room are kings of business, leaders of nations, men and women who carry weight in the world. Yet none of them answered when truth was asked of them. None, except for her. Gasps and murmurs spread across the crowd. Several guests lowered their heads ashamed. They had come expecting to display their influence, to impress the sheikh with their power. But their silence had exposed something deeper: fear, pride, or ignorance. The sheikh continued, his tone steady and commanding. Wisdom is not measured in gold, nor in titles, nor in the armies or companies you control. Wisdom lives in the heart of the one who dares to seek it and the courage of the one who dares to speak it. He gestured toward Manny's daughter. Tonight, that wisdom came from the youngest voice among us. She spoke truth while the rest of you hid in silence. The applause rose again, hesitant at first, then stronger until the hall echoed with it. But this time it wasn't just applause for her Arabic skills. It was for what she represented: humility, courage, and honesty in the face of power. Manny sat silently, his pride swelling. He knew this moment would live with his daughter forever. She had stepped into the spotlight not because she wanted glory, but because she chose truth. The sheikh then walked slowly around the table, his long robes gliding across the polished floor. When he stopped behind Manny's daughter, the entire hall fell silent once more. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Little one," he said, his deep voice softening, "you have reminded us all tonight that greatness comes in many forms. You carry not only knowledge but humility, and that is a gift more precious than wealth." The girl lowered her eyes respectfully, whispering, "Thank you, Your Excellency." The sheikh nodded, then turned to the guests. "And let this be a lesson to all of you. Do not underestimate the small, the quiet, or the young, for often it is they who carry the wisdom you have forgotten. His words hit hard. Several dignitaries exchanged guilty looks. Some shifted uneasily in their seats, while others bowed their heads in silent acknowledgement. The truth was undeniable. One guest, a high-ranking official, leaned toward another and whispered, "This child has done what none of us could. We must remember this." Another businessman muttered under his breath, "We thought tonight was about power, but it was about humility." The atmosphere had shifted completely. The arrogance that once filled the hall had been replaced with reverence. Every eye now looked not to the richest man in the room, not even to the sheikh, but to Manny's daughter, the girl who had spoken with courage when silence had gripped them all. The sheikh returned to his seat, but before he did, he spoke once more, his voice carrying across the entire room. "Remember tonight, for one day when you are faced with a moment of truth, you will recall the courage of this young girl, and perhaps you will find your own voice." The hall was silent again, not with fear this time, but with deep respect, and in that silence, Manny knew. This was a victory greater than any he had ever won in the boxing ring. The night at the Sheikh's palace ended not with the expected displays of wealth and power, but with something far more profound and respect. As the guests slowly left the grand hall, their conversations had changed. No longer were they boasting of business deals or political influence. Instead, they spoke in hushed tones about a young girl who had dared to answer when none of them could. Word of the moment spread quickly. Though cameras had not been allowed inside the palace, discreet recordings from phones made their way online within hours. Clips of Manny's daughter speaking fluent Arabic, calm, clear and confident, appeared across social media. Pacquiao's daughter stuns billionaire Sheikh. Young girl humbles world, leaders with wisdom. Even the sheikh applauds her. Courage. The headlines were everywhere. By morning, millions had watched the clips. Comment sections overflowed with admiration. "Wow, what a brilliant young girl. She's a reflection of her father's humility and strength. This gives me hope for the next generation." Hashtags trended across multiple countries. Educators shared the video in classrooms, saying it was proof that wisdom has no age. Parents sent it to their children as inspiration. And in the Philippines, pride surged like a wave, not just for Manny Pacquiao, the champion, but for his daughter, who carried herself with grace on the world stage. Meanwhile, the sheikh himself released a public statement. That night, he said, "A child reminded us that knowledge is power and humility is the crown of true greatness. May we all learn to listen, not just to the loudest voices, but also to the smallest." It was a rare move, for the sheikh was known for being private, but his words gave the moment even greater weight, cementing it as a story that would be told for years to come. Manny, when asked by reporters, smiled humbly. "I did nothing. That was all her. I am proud, of course, but more than that, I am grateful, because my daughter showed the world that respect, knowledge, and courage are more powerful than any title I have ever held." The clip continued to circulate, now reaching beyond just Manny's fan base. It became a symbol of something larger, a reminder that true dignity doesn't come from money, fame, or influence. It comes from character. For Manny's daughter, life changed subtly. She was still the same girl, playful at home, diligent in her studies, but she now carried the weight of knowing millions looked up to her. Yet she didn't boast. Instead, she often told her friends, "It wasn't about me, it was about respect." And that was the message that stuck with people around the world. The story became a modern parable. In a room filled with wealth and power, it was the youngest, most underestimated voice that spoke the loudest truth. If you believe knowledge is greater than wealth, and respect is greater than power, type wisdom in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories where courage changes everything.